I've created this presentation to help share some information about dyslexia. Until recently, I thought I had a pretty good understanding of this learning disability. I knew it as a neurologically based brain disorder in which people switch letters such as B for D. I knew it made reading difficult, and that was essentially the extent of my knowledge on the topic. Sadly, my teacher training simply didn't prepare me when it came to dyslexia. That is why I've made it my mission to help direct parents, students, and teachers to the wealth of knowledge we have on dyslexia. After much research and training, I now understand that dyslexia is a phonologically based disorder that affects a person's ability to process sounds and letters, and the BD reversal is not actually the defining characteristic as we've all come to believe. Dyslexia affects the language center of the brain that allows us to hear and produce sounds, to rhyme, to blend, and to segment words. The easiest way to understand dyslexia might be this simple definition. If you are an otherwise very intelligent person who inexplicably struggles with reading words, then you probably have dyslexia. I've also come to experience firsthand how dyslexia isn't a defect, but rather a unique gift. School isn't always a very friendly place for a person with dyslexia, but people with dyslexia have the ability to problem solve and find great success in life beyond the classroom. Hopefully, we can all learn a bit more about this disorder so that we can become more effective at accommodating students with dyslexia to see them not as struggling readers, but as an asset in the classroom. As I launched into the current research and best teaching practices on dyslexia, I found myself going through what felt like 6 stages of grief. My first reaction was total disengagement and boredom. I thought I already knew what dyslexia was, and I wasn't sure I needed to learn about a rare condition that affects very few, if any, students. But as I learned more, I began to realize that I didn't truly understand it at all, and I really had a lot to learn. Then I learned that 20% of the population is impacted by dyslexia, and I hit the denial phase. Come on, that's a lot of people. In my school of 600, that would be about 120 students. And you think teachers wouldn't notice this? I wasn't buying it. Then I began to take a long, hard look at what we're doing for struggling readers in our school, and it hit me. That's why our interventions aren't always working for students. When we don't properly diagnose them, we can't properly intervene and help them. We offer what we have, and it doesn't work. So I began looking back through data I had saved over the years, like running records and comprehension assessments, and I was struck with grief. There in front of me were very clear and blatant signs of students struggling with dyslexia. I was devastated that I didn't know better and I didn't help them, and I passed them along, letting the student and myself and everyone else believe that they were just low or struggling or worse yet, lazy. And then I got mad. How is it that I can have degrees and certifications and 10 years of teaching under my belt, and yet this never came up? Why had I never learned more about dyslexia? Why are our schools failing to help these students? And finally, I came full circle as I realized, wow, we have 20% of our student population who needs to be seen and helped. When I talk to students and parents about dyslexia, these are the most common responses I get. The parents say, "Oh my goodness, you just described my kid to a T. Everything you're saying makes so much sense now, and I always knew there was something more going on." Or the parents feel guilty that they had been just assuming that their child was lazy or hadn't been trying hard enough to learn to read. The students usually have big smiles on their faces or they look relieved. They're so grateful that someone understands what they're going through and can put a name to the thing that haunts them. They are thrilled that they aren't broken or dumb and that they can and will learn to read. And finally, they just want everyone to know and understand dyslexia, especially their peers and teachers. Before I go any further, I hope you've watched this short 4-minute video by Ted Ed. If not, pause this video and go watch it before continuing. I think it does a great job of succinctly explaining how the dyslexic brain processes language so differently. Through my presentation, I hope to highlight specific concerns with dyslexia in our K-12 setting and talk about how we can recognize and help students with signs of dyslexia. A person with dyslexia may exhibit one or many of the following characteristics. I currently work with several adolescent students who aren't successfully able to say or write the alphabet. They might begin correctly but fall apart around HIJKLOMPTUV and so on. The students themselves are surprised to realize they've made an error. They may also not be able to hear a rhyming scheme or match two words with the same vowel sound, and they will likely struggle to correctly name letters or make their sounds. Most notably, they will struggle with segmenting and manipulating sounds, such as if I ask them to take the ul sound out of the word sleep to make seep. A person with dyslexia might also exhibit difficulty with left versus right, telling time, or memorizing, though not always the case. Educators or physicians that are not trained in recognizing the features of dyslexia might misdiagnose it as an attention deficit. However, there are about 12 to 24% of people with dyslexia who also have ADD. A person with dyslexia might struggle with calling up the exact words they want to use to express their ideas. To truly understand the struggles of our students with dyslexia, it's helpful to learn about the square root rule. Whereas a student with a traditional brain might take 4 tries or 4 minutes to complete a task, a dyslexic brain may need 4 times its square root or 8 tries to complete a task. That might not seem like a huge discrepancy until you get into longer and larger tasks. Sadly, students with dyslexia are often labeled by themselves or by school as a struggling reader, which contributes to a low self-esteem and negative behaviors in school. Without proper diagnosis and intervention, their ambition and self-efficacy will plummet. We might place them in a comprehension intervention because of low test scores, but that's like treating a broken ankle with cough syrup. What they really need is accurate diagnosis and placement in a phonologically based reading intervention to target their needs. Only then will we see improvement in test scores, school performance, and self-esteem. We've talked a lot about the signs and struggles of a person with dyslexia, but it's very important that we recognize the strengths that our students with dyslexia have to offer. They may excel in math, in listening skills, spatial reasoning, arts, empathy, and big picture thinking. I have students who build rockets in their spare time, can solve challenging 3D puzzles in seconds, can mimic any accent, learn any new technology intuitively, and are wonderful friends and listeners with interpersonal skills well beyond their years. A person with dyslexia also will show a tendency to fixate on a very narrow interest or field. This is due to their high level of intelligence and curiosity, but it is also a coping mechanism for dyslexia. When a person is very knowledgeable in a particular field, they have a strong grasp of the vocabulary specific to that field. This makes reading and understanding more comfortable, so the person is positively reinforced to continue investigating their interest. My student who builds drones, for example, can automatically read complex, multisyllabic words related to aviation and engineering because he's very familiar with them now. Throughout the next 4 slides, let's take a look at some famous people with dyslexia. And please keep in mind that these figures were not successful in spite of their dyslexia. They were successful because of their dyslexia. Dyslexia allows individuals to think, express, perform, interpret, design, and problem solve in a different and unique way. So, what can you look out for in your classroom to begin to spot students with possible dyslexia? First, you'll see repeated and persistent spelling errors. One of the most common signs I notice is students who approximate words. They'll get the correct initial or final sound, but the middle is just a guess. For example, if the word is proved, they might say provided, or for peninsula, you might get Pennsylvania. You might notice extremely messy and laborious handwriting, though that's less common. Students will take an inordinate amount of time to copy information. As you saw in the video, the information is taking the scenic route through their brains, and this results in mistranslations. As most people know, you might also see letter reversals. However, this is more common in children and seen in only about 7% of adults. Because dyslexia affects the language center of the brain, Many students have a difficult time with learning a foreign language. Another sign is persistent mispronunciations of a word. These adorable words we love to hear in toddlers like biscotti might persist into adolescence. Many of my students even struggle to say the word dyslexia. They'll say dialectic or dyslectic or some other variation. As I did, you might be asking yourself, why are students being diagnosed with dyslexia in middle and high school? How wasn't that caught earlier? In short, they may have excellent behavioral compliance and coping mechanisms that work for them. They can beat the system by relying on their background knowledge, using context clues and vocabulary knowledge, and accessing their right brain for problem solving, critical thinking, and reasoning. Additionally, in education, we're very focused on phonology through third grade, but then our focus shifts to comprehension. That's when our students with phonological needs may slip through the cracks. Furthermore, as a society, dyslexia is viewed through a medical model and not seen as an educational concern, which is something we need to change. As classroom teachers, we're often not equipped or educated in the diagnosis or treatment of dyslexia, so our students slip through undiagnosed. The Yale Center for Dyslexia and Creativity has put together the Dyslexia Declaration of Rights, which outlines 5 individual rights for our students with dyslexia. First, they have a right to an accurate diagnosis. This includes input from both the classroom teacher as well as a qualified diagnostician, which can include a school psychologist, a speech-language pathologist, or a reading specialist. Next, students and teachers must not shy away from using the word dyslexia. It's not a bad word or a bad thing, and we can't be afraid of it. We must use it so that we can properly diagnose and provide interventions and accommodations. The word can also give students comfort, confidence, and identity. Students deserve evidence-based instruction that targets their phonological needs. Students have the right to accommodations, which I'll review on a later slide. And lastly, students have the right to a dyslexia-friendly environment throughout their K-12 and college education, and this includes setting a high standard of achievement. If you're seeking an official medical diagnosis of dyslexia, then the most reliable assessment would be an fMRI brain scan and an evaluation by a psychologist. This would indicate which areas of the brain are being used for reading. In a traditional brain, the language center would light up, whereas a brain with dyslexia would underutilize this area. Additionally, you would see that a brain with dyslexia takes much more time to process reading, and the information may never make it to the correct area of the brain. In the field of education, we can't always rely on or wait for a medical diagnosis. We need to identify our students with symptoms of dyslexia and provide intervention immediately. To that end, we can and should use the term dyslexia in an educational setting as needed. We can begin by collecting and triangulating data from several different assessments to identify a student's weaknesses in spelling, decoding, fluency, phonological awareness, and comprehension. Possible assessments can include Words Their Way, PALS, the PASS, DIBBLES, Ames Web, the Woodcock-Johnson, the Tower, the GORT, and several others. Unfortunately, the MAP and STAR assessments are very poor indicators of dyslexia, and we can't rely on them solely as universal screeners. Once you've identified a population of students with signs of dyslexia, what's the next step? We cannot cure dyslexia, but we can help students cope through multisensory instruction. Students will say, see, touch, and do a language task simultaneously to help rewire their brain. The goal is to help them use the language center more efficiently. Over time, as decoding becomes less laborious and more automatic, the student can reallocate their cognitive resources to focus on comprehending the text. When searching for a dyslexia intervention program, it's important to find one that is scientifically based and backed by research. It should also be multisensory and address phonemic and phonologic skills. This slide lists several programs to consider. Students with dyslexia may have an additional need for comprehension intervention due to gaps in learning, but this is not the case for all students. Instruction should address skills such as rhyming, alliteration, letter names and sounds, blending, and segmenting. Instruction must also address syllabication, which is chunking multisyllabic words into smaller syllables, phonics or matching sounds to letters, spelling rules, vocabulary knowledge, morphology and word parts, oral fluency practice, and increasing the student's self-confidence with reading accurately and efficiently. At school and at home, it's important to read books that play with language and sound. When parents ask what they can do at home to support instruction, I always recommend reading out loud for at least 5 minutes a day to build speed, accuracy, and word knowledge. Exposure to text is the single most important and effective strategy that we can provide for any student. When I work with students with dyslexia, they express relief at finally being seen and understood. They know they're intelligent, but they desperately want their peers and teachers to understand that too. They are self-conscious about reading out loud, and they might say they hate reading because it takes so long and it's so challenging for them. Depending on the severity of their phonologic delays, for some, reading can be like translating a foreign language one word at a time, and others will only struggle with new vocabulary words. There are several accommodations we can make in the classroom to help these students. First of all, allow extended time and practice opportunities whenever possible. Reduce the workload if appropriate. Do not require reading out loud in front of their peers, though some students may enjoy volunteering. If possible, provide notes rather than having them copy. This will free their brain to comprehend. I've recently changed my thinking about assistive technology. I used to view audiobooks as a form of cheating. I thought, shouldn't students be reading in school? But providing assistive technology to a student with dyslexia is like providing a ramp to a person in a wheelchair. It will allow them to access the content and to do the deep thinking, which is likely your ultimate teaching goal anyway. So allow them to type instead of handwrite and provide spelling resources whenever you can. If a student asks for help spelling a word, telling them to sound it out or get the dictionary is not going to be an effective solution for a person with dyslexia. Since dyslexia robs students of time, we can give it back through these accommodations. All of the information provided in this presentation was gathered from the following resources, as well as my 10 years of experience as a classroom educator, my university education, and reading intervention training. Thank you for watching, and thank you for being a shining beacon for our students and our students with dyslexia.